There's a couple of holdouts this summer that are interesting. Michael Thomas is one. Jadeveon Clowney is another. Melvin Gordon is also one that comes to mind. These are impact players for their teams, guys who have been important in the winning culture of their franchises. I think, just to take these individually, I don't think that Jadeveon Clowney has any chance of signing a long-term deal with the Houston Rockets. When you look at who needs to be paid there, it's obviously J.J. Watt, who has been paid there for a while. DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to be highly paid. Deshaun Watson is going to need to be highly paid. And so there just isn't room for another 19, 20 or so $1 million for an elite defensive end number. So just Jadeveon Clowney situation in Houston, which is now a holdout, could be extended and it could get ugly. He has not signed his franchise tag yet, and it's hard to blame him. He knows what he's worth, but it seems like the wrong place for him to get paid. Melvin Gordon, we already know what's happening with Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon knows that he's important to this team. He knows that he has, the ability to score. He is an impact player. He's not elite like Zeke or even Saquon, but Melvin Gordon is a good player. But even Phillip Rivers, their starting quarterback, knows that Melvin Gordon is good, but they have good players around him. And, you feel for a guy like Melvin Gordon because he has been so productive and he's making bupkis relative to what other really top running backs are making, $5.6 million a year. Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints is also holding out. Now, of any of the guys that are holding out, he deserves to do this and to put pressure on the New Orleans Saints. Why? Because he's the third highest paid wide receiver on their team. Right? What does that tell you? And he's a stud, Michael Thomas, who led the league in receptions last year. I think he was second or third in yards. Michael Thomas is an impact player, and he is grossly underpaid because he wasn't a first-round pick. And so he comes in off his fourth year. I think he's making like $1.2 or $3 million. I mean, it's patently wrong what he's making. But the difference with the New Orleans Saints and Michael Thomas, Melvin Gordon, and the Los Angeles Chargers is that both of those squads have extremely intelligent, extremely accomplished, Hall of Fame bound quarterbacks leading them. Drew Brees, obviously, in New Orleans. Phillip Rivers out in Los Angeles. And so if they're missing one of their key guys, you're worried, but you're not overly worried. You have faith that your quarterback, who are both, experienced in Pro Bowls and, some of the best that the game has had over the last decade plus, they're going to help lead you towards a championship. I'm not sure that that's the same in Dallas. Now, Zeke Elliott, we know his statistics. He's led the league in rushing 2 of the 3 years that he's been in the NFL, which is, it's fantastic. You just think about that. He came in as a rookie and rushed for 1,631 yards and 15 touchdowns. The second year, he had a suspension, so he missed 6 games that year. He only played in 10 games that year. He still almost rushed for 1,000 yards. And then last year, on 304 carries, 1,434 yards, 6 touchdowns, and that side of his game that people knock that he doesn't have, right? He's not like Saquon. He's not like Christian McCaffrey. He's not like Le'Veon Bell. He still had 77 receptions. Right? Not bad for a guy who's not a receiving running back. 77. I think the most I had, and I was one of the elite in my time, I think was 76 in a season. Zeke Elliott, who led the league in rushing, and which is something I never did, had 77 receptions. So he is that complete back, and he is everything for the Dallas Cowboys, at least when you think about what their game is predicated on. That is running the ball, pounding the ball with a good offensive line and making things easier for your quarterback and Dak Prescott. Now, we like Dak Prescott. The Cowboys like Dak Prescott. They know that they're going to have to pay him, and because of the way that quarterbacks are, he's been a starter for three years. He's led them aptly for 3 years. He's not going anywhere. He's going to get 27, 28, whatever $million. That just is what it is. It comes with being a starting quarterback and an accomplished starting quarterback in the National Football League. But really, what is Dak without Zeke? Which is what makes this situation in Dallas so much more precarious than these other places. If Zeke is gone, and we saw this for a stretch in his second year, it has an impact on this team. So here are the numbers for Zeke in that 2017 season, or these numbers for Dak in that 2017 season. Zeke played in 10 games. In those 10 games, Dak averaged about 218 yards a game, 17 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. They were 6-4, 62% completion percentage. Without Zeke, his completion percentage actually went up, probably because he was dinking and dunking it and getting the ball out of his hands quickly. 64%, it's not a significant rise, but 64%. His yards per game were down by almost 30 yards per game, 190. 5 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. And even though he was 3-3, he started without Dak 0-3. It was ugly without Zeke for Dak Prescott. Now, you give him credit because he was able to turn it around. He was able to win a couple of games and start taking the burden upon himself. But clearly, if you're the Dallas Cowboys and you have these design to be a contender this season, you need Ezekiel Elliott to be available and on your roster, and you got to pay the guy. Now, what's preventing this from happening? Because it seems easy, right? He's led the league in rushing twice in his 3 short years. He's a physical stud. There's a couple of things that jump to mind that could prevent the Dallas Cowboys from doing this. One, and this is minor, but it's you can't ignore it. Dak's had some off-field stuff. Some of it has been nonsense, but it's stuff. I mean, and Zeke, why do I keep saying Dak? Zeke has had some off-field stuff. And again, the thing at the party or whatever it was this past off-season, I think that was benign. I mean, he was hammered. He was lost. But I don't think he was intentionally was trying to hurt anybody. But we remember the party where he pulled the girl's dress down, the obviously issue that stemmed from college with his ex-girlfriend, which has some clouds around it. And so there's nothing specific, but there's enough smoke that it makes you give a tiny bit of pause if you are the Dallas Cowboys. I think the bigger issue is that there's no market for a running back. And I don't mean that there's no place for a running back to go. I mean, what should you pay an NFL running back? It hasn't been defined. The last thing that defined it was an anomaly. And that anomaly was Adrian Peterson when he was making ridiculous amount from the Minnesota Vikings. And that number set the franchise number that allowed Le'Veon Bell to make the $14 million that he wanted. It pushed him to want to make $18 million. And so there's an outlier. You just go look at the rankings of running back salaries. There's one outlier. It's Le'Veon Bell, who's making $14 million, but that's based on a contract that was an outlier itself. Everybody else is down at $8 million a year or $6 million a year, $5 million a year for the top 3 or 4 running backs. So what do you pay Zeke? Do you pay him 15? Do you pay him 10? Whatever that number is, because of what he's accomplished, it will be the defining number for running backs. The Dallas Cowboys are in a position to set the market for running backs. And it's a hard position to be in because there's no real precedent. The only one is Le'Veon Bell that I mentioned, but I already told you that's an outlier. That's not sustainable, I don't think, for the position, especially with the way that running backs are used. But the reason that the Cowboys have to get this done is that they're not as good of a contender, or maybe even a contender at all, if Zeke Elliott is not on this football team. I like Dak Prescott. I like his growth. He's got confidence. You see it when he's out there on the football field. He's not shy. He'll do whatever it takes to win. But he's a different player without Ezekiel Elliott churning up 4.75 yards a carry, now even catching passes out of the backfield, finishing runs forward, scoring, all those things that Zeke does that makes the Cowboys better, and most importantly makes Dak's job easier. They're not winning without Ezekiel Elliott. So all of his holdouts, there's a bunch of them. There's one that really catches my eye. It's Ezekiel Elliott. The Cowboys have to pay him.